I just want to take a moment to give thanks and to invite everybody, especially myself, to take a deep breath and breathe. And let's just get grounded in this space and time. Give thanks for being here together. Just give thanks to the people of this land who walked and lived and loved here and made space for us. Let's give thanks to all the beautiful people here in Oakland, all those rooting for the home team. We want to hold in our mind's eyes all of our beautiful children, all the gorgeous parents, mamas and papas, pregnant mamas, pregnant people, all of those beautiful people doing what they can to help us to continue to walk as humans in dignity on this earth. Let's circle all those beautiful people, all those families, all those loved ones, the loving energy of our Creator, however we see that. Let's lift them up, let's make them strong, let's give them our energy. And the work we do here today, the words, the party, the play, we do as a giving, spirited energy, as a gift for them, to them. To them today, to them we will never know, but who will benefit from our love today. And with that we say, Amen, blessed be, and peace.
Ashe.
And Ashe. I will hand over the microphone to Mama Ayanna, who I'm so honored is here, and let her tell us about herself and whatever she'd like to share.
Thank you. My name is Ayanna Mishama, also known as Mama Ayanna. I am a mother, birth mother of 6, and mother raising 7, 6 of them boys and 1 daughter. I am a wife and 6 grandchildren in my blended family. That would make more like 7 grandchildren, and 8 grandchildren. And let's see, born and raised in the Midwest on the Underground Railroad with an extended family whose matriarch came out of the United Negro Improvement Association, UNIA, where she created a space for single mothers and poor families. She had housing, and her name was Ruby Jones, and she also had a space that we called the farm, and it was a farm and a nightclub and a motel. So you didn't, if you want, your hookup was right there, or you couldn't drive home, you had a place to sleep. And she had cows and chickens, and she also had a big garden, and so the restaurant was supplied by the garden and the farm. So a woman well ahead of her time. And I was also raised by my grandparents, who taught me to plant a garden. When I was 4 years old was the first time I planted a garden or helped kill a chicken, fresh food. The men, it was called a dead-end street then, now we call them cul-de-sacs. And at the end of the street, they raised their cow and their pigs, and they would kill them, halal, and then everybody had their smokehouse. Remember hiding in the smokehouse, picking on my grandmother's smoked meats. So, and this is serious, she had apples that were like this big, and grapes with seeds that were like this big. And she encouraged us to chew the seeds, right? So, and then behind our house was a big community garden, and so families were invited to participate in planting and harvesting the fruit, which made the Little Red Hen my favorite story. And I remember telling that to one of my teachers in school, and she said, "That's a communist story, right?" Well, it is communal, you know. And so that was how I was raised, in a big extended family with some really powerful elders. And my mother was eventually became a single mother who paved the way in a whole lot of ways, and taught me about birth in a way that made me live to learn. Because when this story, she still tells the story that when I was born, that I was pale and she felt disassociated from me. But there are a couple of things that didn't happen in my birth. One is I was not nursed. I was not a breastfed baby. And two, she was given drugs and put to sleep when I was born. So understandable that she might feel some disassociation. But over time, she said I became a beautiful baby. And delightful. And interesting, because I started walking on and talking on the same day when I was 15 months old. And so not much further than that, along in life, a couple of years later, I was teaching myself to read and fully articulate and moving in a whole different way in life. And so understanding that as a child, having a sense of vision and seeing and walking with the ancestors and being spoken to by the ancestors and having a clear memory of that, that's guiding me throughout my life. And I had my first child at 18 after getting out. I was in and out of reform school and detention home. I had my first child at 18. And worked very hard to have a natural birth. I studied the Lamaze breathing methods and was able to have a birth in the birthing room at Alta Bates. It was new at that time, and as a teen mother, I was really grateful to have that experience. Breastfed my child, and then went to work and had him put on terrible formula, corn syrup and condensed milk. But that was common at that time, and was encouraged to take him off the breast early, right? So these experiences helped shape me as I moved into my life and became an educator, and then 11 years later I had my next child. And decided at that time, he was also born at the birth center in Alta Bates, a natural birth, and was really quick. That was only a 2.5-hour delivery. But it was interesting because midwives were there, but they couldn't, because they weren't allowed to help assist with the birth at that time. There were nurses that were midwives in the birth room, and because of that child he literally flew into the doctor. The doctor got there right in time to catch him. So in that sense, again, I learned. At that point, I became involved with a group of mothers, and we began to educate ourselves. And we educated ourselves to become doulas, and we began to educate the community around natural birth and birth equity, creating birth equity, and not only just birth equity, but health equity among ourselves. I was also part of an organized group called Foresight Magazine. And we were educating the community around health and what we would now call equity issues and around racism and white supremacy. And the more you educate others, you also educate yourself. So I had 5 children in 8 years and was nursing and pregnant for 11 years straight. And in that time, as educating myself as a doula and beginning to support other women in their births, I also began to see a lot of patterns in the birth process. And we're going to talk about some of that, right? Yeah, so I'm not going to go into deep. I'm not sure how much you want to know about me. During that time period, I was also an activist for Black liberation, and began to found organizations and work with founding organizations, including the Black August Organizing Committee and the Malcolm X Grassroots Movement Oakland chapter, and working for human rights, against genocide, against sexist oppression and gender oppression, against and for reparations for African people, and for our political freedom for our political prisoners, who the United States still denies that we have prisoners that were, people that were in prison during the war on the Black Liberation Movement. Many of them have now made their transition or have been in prison for 30 to 40 years. I think Chip Fitzgerald has been in prison like 43 years now. And raising my family. Also during this period, there had been no separation between the spiritual and political. My awakenings happened simultaneously. With each birth of my child, I became more spiritually enhanced. I began to have visions with the birth of my third child, and had spiritual awakenings all through my young adult life, and began to study spiritual and natural health practices. In the course of that, became a vegan and began to live a plant-based life, and have always been an animal lover, so it wasn't long before I began to get messages from the food that I ate. In particular, one of the most important ones was a friend had brought fresh killed beef to me, and we ate that. I cooked some really, what I thought were delicious rare steaks, and had the imprint of that cow upon me, and the lessons of the energetics of the cow, and the divine intelligence that they carried. And for me, no judgment on anyone else. That taught me for me, my path was to begin to release myself of animals, and it was in alignment with my understanding of the ecology of the planet and how we utilize the resources and the nourishment and the nurturing that the planet gives us. Also during that period, and I began to lead women's healing circles. One of our strategies, and I share this with you, especially those of you that are younger, one of our strategies as we were organizing, and for me, is I have to be able to spiritually resonate with people that I worked with in the ground organizing. So we decided we would have a women's circle so that we would begin to know the women that wanted to come into the work with us. And in the beginning, it was a group of older and younger women, and we were self-educating each other. There were some really powerful professionals in the group, epidemiologists, educators, and scientists. But the older women found it a lot to work with the younger women, that the younger women coming in were really needy. It's a lot of trauma. And so it ended up being a group of younger women that I anchored. And during that period, what I found was 5 out of 6 of those women had experienced some level of sexual abuse or physical abuse. And so that healing trauma became part of the work, right? We would also maybe call that, some of it, womb work, right? Now, womb healing work. And so that also, we began to have ceremony and ritual, interacting with nature to heal the trauma from sexual and physical and even mental abuse. And I began to look at and name that pattern also in my life and in my relationships, and begin to release those type of relationships and recognize the history in my own life. So I was a sexually abused child who began to express it by acting out and finding a high level of sensitivity because of where the ancestors taught me to go during that period of learning to trance out and then move away from the physical environment and communicate with the spiritual. So in that, I began to recognize where some of my adult trauma patterns came from and did some really strong self-healing work with my own self, which meant spending time by myself in nature. And I don't know how safe it is to do this anymore. I still do it sometimes. Finding safe spaces to go and spend time. Often letting the sun hit my body, learning to be naked in the sun, learning to have my feet in the water and lay on the earth and listen and allow the earth to touch my body and the elemental forces to come to me and work with me and heal me. And trying that best to take that healing while I'm doing my spiritual healing in the political realm and move into, bring it into the prisons behind the walls. I was smuggling in books on vegetarianism and veganism, instead of drugs. That was fun. And pictures of nature. I remember one time going through a metal detector, and I had this shirt on, and I had pictures, and they kept making the metal detector go off, right? And there was a black woman guard who kind of eventually let me go through. And another time I had some pictures, and the women, we just kind of passed them behind and somehow got them around the metal detector. And they were just pictures of when I went down to where the river meets the ocean or up to the mountains, and just kind of sharing that vibration. Many of those brothers that I worked with were innovators in the prison hunger strike movement. That got many of them are now out from behind the walls that had spent 30 years in the segregated housing unit called the SHU. And I had several people come out and tell me I was help them change their lives and help them work with the what they had to work with in the prisons based on the books that I had smuggled in. So, raising children as an activist and mother and nursing, not being able to fast for 11 years and figuring that out, right? Well, I guess I'll do raw for Ramadan, right? Or for Black August, right? And, so learning how to nourish my body in a plant-based way while giving birth was a very important part of growth, and that definitely included lots of nuts and legumes and beans and having dreams come and tell me how to eat, like adding brown rice and discovering quinoa and releasing a taste for animal products, and re-educating my